57 seconds. That is all it took. 57 seconds for Marjorie Taylor Greene to sit in complete silence after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez set a voting record next to a fundraising report, looked across the table, and asked the one question that the Freedom Caucus had already answered by voting to expel her. What did Kevin McCarthy give you? Not a complicated question, not a partisan attack, just a voting record, a fundraising timeline, and the gap between what Greene said she stood for and what the receipts show she actually did. Watch what happens when AOC reads those numbers out loud. Watch Greene's face change. Watch her lead attorney reach for his notepad and write something down very quickly. And watch 57 seconds of silence from the woman who told America she serves no group in Washington and then proceeded to serve one group in Washington so loyally that her own caucus voted her out for it. You need to see this until the very end, because what AOC uncovered in that hearing room is not about politics in the abstract. It is about a specific transaction, a specific deal, a specific set of votes that moved in one direction in exchange for something that moved in the other. And the receipts for both sides of that deal are in the public record, waiting for someone to put them in the same room at the same time. If you are new to this channel, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. This hearing just became the most important testimony of the year, and you need to see every second of what happened next. Let me set the scene for you. House Oversight Committee, Room 2154, Wednesday morning, 10:31 a.m. Eastern Time. The room had a different charge than the standard oversight hearing. Everyone in that building knew the history. Greene and AOC in the same room carries weight that most congressional pairings do not carry. These are not two politicians who have managed a professional distance. They are two politicians who have publicly attacked each other, insulted each other's intelligence, and been in the same chaotic hearing room together on one of the most viral nights in congressional history. The Crockett hearing, the eyelashes night. AOC had been the one who jumped in that night, pointed at Greene, and said those 4 words that went everywhere. That is absolutely unacceptable. Greene had turned to her and said, "Do your feelings hurt?" That exchange had been replayed more times than either of them could count. But that was the moment. This was the preparation. And there is a difference between the two that this room was about to understand. AOC arrived first. No folder visible yet. Just a legal pad, a pen, and the particular stillness of someone who has already decided exactly what they are going to say and is waiting to say it. She sat down. She wrote one line on her legal pad. She underlined it twice. Then she looked at the door. Greene arrived with 3 attorneys and 2 aides. That walk, that chin, the practiced posture of someone who has been in hostile rooms her entire career and has never once left one in a position she did not choose. She sat down at the witness table and she looked across at AOC with the kind of look that says, "I remember that night too, and I am not the one who should be uncomfortable right now." She checked her phone. She looked almost ready. She thought she knew how this was going to go. She did not see the folder that AOC's aide placed on the table 30 seconds after Greene sat down. The first 25 minutes were standard procedure. Other committee members went through background questions. Greene's committee work, her voting history on procedural matters, the standard framing that gives a hearing its foundation before the real questions begin. Greene answered each one with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been doing this for 4 years. Short, direct, no openings. She looked comfortable. She thought the worst was behind her. Then Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took the microphone. Congresswoman Greene. The room shifted. Not the broad charge of a partisan confrontation, something more specific. The particular electricity of two people in a room who have public history and unfinished business, and everyone else in the room knows exactly what both of those things are. Greene looked up. She did not look away. AOC opened the folder. She pulled out two documents and placed them on the table side by side, without holding either one up. She looked at them for a moment. Then she looked at Greene. "I want to start with something you said publicly." She picked up the first document. "This is a statement you released on July 7th, 2023, the day news broke that the House Freedom Caucus had voted to remove you as a member." She read from it. Quote, "In Congress, I serve Northwest Georgia first and serve no group in Washington." End quote. She set it down. She picked up the second document. "This is your voting record from January 2023 through June 2023. She held it up briefly, then set it flat on the table. He read from it. "January 3rd through January 7th, 2023. Voted for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker of the House on all 15 ballots, including the final successful ballot, while the majority of Freedom Caucus members withheld their votes or voted against him. May 31st, 2023. Voted in favor of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the bipartisan debt ceiling deal McCarthy negotiated with the Biden White House. June 2023. Publicly criticized Freedom Caucus members who opposed the debt ceiling deal, calling their approach, and I am quoting your own words, immature." She set the voting record down. She looked at Greene. "You said you serve no group in Washington." She tapped the voting record. "But in the 6 months before your Freedom Caucus colleagues voted to remove you, you backed Kevin McCarthy on every vote where he needed you." She paused. "I want to understand what that was. Was that serving Northwest Georgia, or was that serving Kevin McCarthy?" Greene's lead attorney moved immediately. He leaned toward her. Greene shook her head slightly. She was going to answer this herself. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," her voice was flat and controlled, "Kevin McCarthy was the legitimate Speaker of the House. Supporting the Speaker of my party is not serving a group. It is supporting leadership. My constituents sent me to Washington to work within the Republican majority, and delivering results through that majority requires supporting the Speaker. That is not a transactional relationship. That is governance." AOC looked at her for a moment. She wrote one word on her legal pad. Then she looked up. "You used the word transactional." She reached into the folder. She pulled out a third document. She held it up long enough for the cameras to capture it, then set it flat on the table. "This is your campaign fundraising data from the Federal Election Commission covering January through September 2023. She opened it to a specific page. She read slowly. "January 2023. Month you began publicly supporting McCarthy for Speaker. Your campaign fundraising for that month was $892,000. She paused. "That was your highest single-month fundraising total since your first election." She turned the page. "February 2023, $743,000. March, $681,000. She turned again. "May 31st, 2023, the day you voted for the McCarthy debt ceiling deal. Your campaign fundraising in the 48 hours after that vote was $340,000. She set the document down. $340,000 in 48 hours. After a vote that your own Freedom Caucus colleagues called a betrayal of conservative principles. She looked at Greene. "Who donated $340,000 to your campaign in 48 hours after you voted for a bipartisan debt ceiling deal?" A murmur moved through the room. Quiet, controlled. The sound of journalists and committee members absorbing a number they had not heard before in this context. Greene's second attorney had leaned forward. She was writing something fast. Greene looked at AOC. Her expression had not changed, but something underneath it had shifted. The calculation happening in real time. This was not the question she had prepared for. Her team had prepared for questions about the expulsion itself, about the Boebert confrontation, about the procedural details of the Freedom Caucus vote. They had not prepared for fundraising data placed next to voting dates. Congresswoman, the fundraising patterns of my campaign are a matter of public record and reflect the support of my constituents who I was going to stop you there. AOC held up one hand, the quiet traffic stop gesture. Not aggressive, just certain. You said constituents. She picked up the fundraising document. She found a specific line. She read it. Quote, from the FEC disclosure. Of the $340,000 raised in the 48 hours following the May 31st vote, $287,000 came from donors outside the state of Georgia. She set it down. She looked at Greene. $287,000 from outside Georgia in 48 hours. After a vote your own caucus called a betrayal. She paused. Those are not your constituents. Who are they? If you have made it this far and this matters to you, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. What AOC pulls out of that folder next is the document that turned this hearing into something nobody in that room was expecting. Stay with this until the end. Greene's lead attorney was on his feet. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, campaign fundraising is a matter of public record, and my client has every right to receive donations from supporters across the country, regardless of their state of residence. This line of questioning implies something improper about entirely legal campaign contributions. The implication is, I am not implying anything. AOC looked at the attorney. She looked at him with the particular patience of someone who spent years watching powerful people try to reframe questions they cannot answer. She said, I am reading from your client's own FEC disclosure. Every number I have cited is in her public filing. She looked back at Greene. I am asking her to explain the timing. She picked up the fundraising document one more time. $340,000, 48 hours. After a vote her own party called a betrayal. She set it back down. The timing is the question, not the legality, the timing. The attorney sat down. Now I need to stop for a second. If you believe that the timing of political donations around specific votes deserves a public explanation, hype this video right now. The hype button is right next to like. You can hype 3 times a day for free. We have 7 days to get this into the top 100 most hyped videos on YouTube. Every single hype counts. Do it now. Then keep watching, because what AOC reads next from that folder is the sentence that will appear in every political accountability analysis filed in connection with this hearing. AOC reached back into the folder. She pulled out a 4th document. 1 page. She held it up long enough for the cameras to see it. Then she placed it flat on the table with the others. 4 documents now: voting record, fundraising timeline, FEC donor geography breakdown, and this. She opened it to the relevant section. This is an internal Republican conference memo from April 2023, obtained through a committee document request. It describes the strategic relationship between the Speaker's office and members who publicly supported McCarthy during the Speaker election. She found the passage. She read it. Quote, members who demonstrated early and consistent public support for Speaker McCarthy's candidacy have been identified as priority recipients for leadership PAC support, committee assignment considerations, and donor network introductions. Continued alignment on key votes, including the debt ceiling legislation, is expected to be reflected in ongoing support. End quote. She set the document down. She looked at Greene. Priority recipients for donor network introductions. She picked up the fundraising document, $340,000 from outside Georgia in 48 hours. She set it down. She picked up the voting record. Voted for McCarthy on all 15 ballots. Voted for the debt ceiling deal. Criticized colleagues who opposed it. She set it down. She picked up the conference memo. Continued alignment on key votes is expected to be reflected in ongoing support. She set it down. 4 documents, 4 data points, 1 pattern. She looked at Greene directly. You told the public you serve no group in Washington. She pointed at the 4 documents laid side by side on the table. But this pattern suggests that you and Speaker McCarthy had an arrangement. You delivered votes, he delivered access, assignments, and donor introductions. And when your Freedom Caucus colleagues finally understood what that arrangement was, they voted you out, unanimously, for the first time in the history of the caucus. She paused. I am asking you one question, just one. Was there an explicit agreement between your office and Speaker McCarthy's office that your votes in his favor would be reciprocated with access to his donor network? 57 seconds. A journalist in the second row kept time. A committee aide at the back of the room checked her watch. Multiple sources in the room compared notes afterward. 57 seconds where Marjorie Taylor Greene, the woman who had built an entire political identity on being unbuyable, uncorrupted, and unapologetically America first rather than Washington insider, said absolutely nothing. Her hands were on the table. Her attorneys were both writing. The aide who had traveled with her was looking at the floor. The room was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights above the press gallery. Drop a comment right now? Tell me what 57 seconds of silence about a donor network introduction means, because AOC already knows, and she is about to say it out loud. When Greene finally spoke, her voice had a quality it had not had at any point in the morning. Not the flat-controlled register of prepared testimony. Something more careful, more aware of the ground underneath it. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, I have never had an explicit agreement with any speaker or any leadership office regarding my votes in exchange for any form of support. My votes are cast on the merits of the legislation and my obligations to my constituents. Any fundraising that occurred following my votes reflects the support of Americans who agree with my positions, not any transactional arrangement. She paused. And I want to note that the memo you referenced describes a general leadership communication strategy, not a specific agreement with my office. AOC looked at her for a moment. She wrote something on her legal pad. She looked at it. She looked back up. You said no explicit agreement. She picked up the conference memo. She read the relevant line again. Continued alignment on key votes is expected to be reflected in ongoing support. She set it down. Expected. That word does not describe an explicit agreement. She picked up the fundraising document. $340,000 from outside Georgia in 48 hours after the debt ceiling vote. She set it down. That does not prove an explicit agreement either. She looked at Greene. But here is what it does prove. She picked up all 4 documents together, held them as a set. Your votes aligned with what McCarthy needed. McCarthy's network introduced you to donors who sent you $287,000 from outside your state in 2 days. Your Freedom Caucus colleagues, who were not part of that arrangement, voted to remove you. And when they did, Kevin McCarthy publicly called it, and I am quoting his exact words, a loss for the Freedom Caucus. She set the 4 documents down. He defended you after they expelled you. She looked at Greene. That is what an arrangement looks like even when nobody signs a contract. She gathered the 4 documents back into the folder. She closed it. These will be entered into the congressional record today, the voting record, the fundraising timeline, the FEC donor geography breakdown, and the Republican conference memo. All four permanently public. She looked at Greene one final time. You told America you serve no group in Washington. She held up the closed folder. 4 documents say otherwise. She set the folder down. And the people who know you best, the colleagues who shared your caucus, who attended your meetings, who heard what you said behind closed doors, they reached the same conclusion. Unanimously. For the first time in the history of a group that has never expelled anyone before, she paused. I did not come here today to relitigate the night you insulted my colleague's eyelashes. I came here because the question of who you were actually serving in that building deserves a real answer. And you just gave me 57 seconds of silence instead. She stepped back from the microphone. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. The hearing continued for another 35 minutes. Other representatives asked other questions, procedural matters. None of it landed the way those 20 minutes had landed. Nobody was listening with the same attention. Because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had walked into that room with a folder and 4 documents and done something nobody had done publicly before in a congressional setting. She had laid the Freedom Caucus expulsion next to the McCarthy loyalty votes, next to the fundraising surge, next to the donor network memo, and asked the question that the expulsion itself had already answered. Not whether there was a deal, what the deal was. And she had gotten 57 seconds of silence and then an answer that used the words "no explicit agreement," as if the absence of a signature was a complete response. Within the hour, the clips were everywhere. AOC reading the fundraising numbers. AOC holding up all 4 documents together. Greene sitting with her hands flat on the table and nothing to say. Political analysts were already discussing whether the Republican conference memo created grounds for a formal ethics inquiry into the relationship between leadership PAC activity and member votes. Campaign finance experts were debating whether the donor geography breakdown raised questions about coordination. And somewhere in the offices of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who had publicly defended Greene after her expulsion and called it a loss for the Freedom Caucus, someone was probably having a very careful conversation about the conference memo that was now in the congressional record. This is not partisan theater. This is a voting record. A fundraising timeline, a donor geography breakdown, and an internal Republican conference memo. All of it in the public record, all of it describing the same pattern. You delivered votes, the network delivered money. Your colleagues who were not part of the arrangement voted you out for the first time in the history of the caucus, and the question is not whether that constitutes a legal violation. The question is whether it constitutes what Marjorie Taylor Greene told her supporters she would never do in Washington, serve a group instead of her constituents. 4 documents, 1 pattern, and 57 seconds of silence from the woman who said she serves no group in Washington. Share this video everywhere. All 4 documents are now in the congressional record. The fundraising timeline is public. The FEC donor geography disclosure is public. The Republican conference memo is now in the permanent record. The American people have a right to read all 4 side by side and reach their own conclusion about the difference between serving Northwest Georgia and serving Kevin McCarthy. The pressure cannot stop here. The question AOC asked deserves a real answer, not 57 seconds of silence. Not no explicit agreement. A real answer. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and if you missed Liz Cheney placing the martial law text message next to the sworn testimony that said, "I don't recall," or Adam Schiff reading the Russian state television transcript next to the NATO voting record, watch those videos on screen right now. 4 hearings, 4 sets of documents. 4 silences. The same pattern from 4 different directions, all describing the same thing. A politician who told the public she was one thing and the documents show she was something else. The truth does not arrive all at once. It arrives one document at a time, one hearing at a time, one 57-second silence at a time. 57 seconds, 4 documents, 1 question, and Marjorie Taylor Greene with no contract to show, no answer to give, and the history of her own expulsion sitting in the room with her as the only verdict that actually mattered.